Du Fu, thinking of my brothers on a moonlit night. Warning drums cut off travel this autumn. Over the borderlands, a single wild goose calls. White dew tonight, and the moon is bright as it was above my old hometown. I have younger brothers, all parted and scattered, and no family left to ask if they are alive or dead. I send letters, but receive no answers. How much longer will it be with this war dragging on and on? So we continue with Du Fu's pentasyllabic regulated poems. Now this poem, as you have probably seen, has a very evident topic that we've already encountered, which is lamenting for one's family's sake. We read a poem that was similar to this, but it was more about Du Fu's nuclear family, his wife and children. That was the poem, well, we read a couple like this, but I was thinking of Moonlit Night, the first of Du Fu's poems in this section. So this is a similar poem. The topic is separation, in this case separation from brothers. And in both poems we get the moon as a catalyst, as a unifier that somehow manages to connect the relatives that are far apart, because they're both doing the same activity, which is gazing upon the same moon, which is a pretty common, even stereotypical topic of or trope of Chinese poetry of this period in poems about separation, the moon as uniting those who are not together. Like in that poem, a major sub-theme of this poem, of course, is the An Lushan rebellion itself, which is the cause of this separation, of this break in communication within a family. And, we've already talked about Du Fu's ability at merging private and public grief, private and public calamity in the same poem. Okay, so some background information about this poem before we go bit by bit, breaking it apart. It seems that this poem was written around the autumn of the year 759. Those references to autumn in the poem, that is, autumn explicitly mentioned, the wild geese, but also dew at night, seem to be connecting us to the 9th month festival. One of the old seasons of the Chinese calendar, the very traditional Chinese calendar, was divided into 24 seasons. One of them was called dew growing or dew falling or white dew. And it was, in the transition between autumn and winter. So this poem, 759, Du Fu had been sent, if you remember the previous poem, to Huazhou for a minor role. After hardly a year in that post, he resigned, and from then on he never held official office, especially at the capital. So he first traveled west to the area of Qin, close to the capital, and from there he would go to Shu. This poem was allegedly composed while he was in the Qin area. And the war was going on. The war was very long. In 757, the western capital was recovered. But later on, the eastern capital, Luoyang, would be recovered, but then it would rebel again. And, warfare would continue for a fair amount of years after this poem was composed and devastating most of northern China. Okay, let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet, as usual. Warning drums cut off travel this autumn. Over the borderlands, a single wild goose calls. So we get here in this first couplet introducing the thinking about the brothers and the problems that are separating the brothers. We get two images, one of nature and one of society, and both in autumn. The civilizational images, warning drums. We may imagine war drums parading, the troops coming and going, in the region where Du Fu is might be an indication that traveling is still very restricted because of the war situation. So the possibility, even if theoretical, of joining family members is, totally out of the question. Easy travel is not to be had yet. And in this border region to the northwest, he says, a single wild goose calls. Now, this is a pretty conventional image. Geese returning are symbols of autumn. So geese leave the north in autumn and would return in spring, I imagine. But also geese have been traditionally connected, we've commented it on a few poems, with messages because of a Han legend that a Chinese that was exiled among the barbarians pretended to have been able to send a message to the emperor tied on a goose's leg. So the cry of the goose, if really heard by Du Fu in one of these autumn nights while he's gazing at the moon, rings a familiar bell in his mind and makes him think about the lack of communication with his relatives. Which relatives is it? This is not a poem about wife and children, it's a poem about brothers, to which it seems Du Fu was quite attached. Okay, let's go to the next couplet. White dew tonight, and the moon is bright as it was above my old hometown. So there is a moon. This same moon that is above Du Fu now is probably shining over his hometown. And his hometown was the place where his nuclear family, or at least the family center, would have been. From what we will learn in the next couplet, the nuclear family and their center has probably been destroyed, all the family members dispersed. But still, it acts as a visual locus of the family institution itself and of all its members, which Du Fu is missing and is thinking about. So dew and the moonlight. Yeah, remember, dew is generally a late autumn, early winter indicator. So this might be at least probably the 9th month, if not later, perhaps the beginning of winter, the end of autumn, the beginning of winter, close to the Chrysanthemum Festival, or any of the major festivals in which the Chinese enjoyed getting together with other family members. Now, the crux of the poem is in the third couplet, which is the one that really introduces the topic of the title. I have younger brothers, all parted and scattered, and no family left to ask if they're alive or dead. Now, Du Fu had quite a few brothers. Well, they were actually half-brothers because they were sons of the same father but of different mothers, because Du Fu's mother died when he was pretty young. But he still had a strong affection towards these half-brothers. And in fact, one of the, I don't know if real or apocryphal stories tells that he had relinquished his privilege of a direct rank in the civil service because of his father's position to one of his brothers. So he really had affection for them. Anyway, he can't talk with them. The younger brothers are parted and scattered by the war. When Du Fu is saying that no family left to ask, I imagine this is not to be taken literally. It doesn't mean all the family members have died. It rather means the family home, the family nucleus, has disappeared as such, or at least the family is no longer there, the family compound. So, because Chinese families, were very hierarchical, structured and unitary, and they generally centered around a geographical locus and even a specific house where many members of the family lived together. So probably the family seat is depopulated or even destroyed. So it's difficult or impossible, to catch up with the dispersed different family members. The conclusion, I send letters but receive no answers. How much longer will it be with this war dragging on and on? So the poem ends on a rhetorical question or a rhetorical note. How long will the war keep going? Probably very long. I don't know if Du Fu was able to re-establish contact with all his family members. He managed, at this time when this poem is being written, he has united with his wife and children and is starting a long period of wandering to the west and to the south. He probably did manage in later years to re-establish contact with some of the family members. But anyway, besides that specific point, as usual in Du Fu, the message is my lack of communication with my brothers is representative of the chaos and lack of communication of other people with their relatives in the empire in this time of chaos and war. So yet another poem representing in a subjective but very illustrative way the abstract theme of the Alishan rebellion and its consequences for the Chinese. So a nice piece, maybe not as interesting as the 2 or 3 poems we've been reading lately by Du Fu. This feels a bit less effective and a bit more conventional, but still quite a good poem.